The dust devil appeared first, spinning across the highway like a ghost made visible by desert sand. Marcus Chen gripped the steering wheel of his pickup truck tighter, squinting against the late afternoon sun that turned the Nevada landscape into a shimmering mirage. In the passenger seat, his daughter Zoe hummed along to a song only she could hear, her fingers tracing patterns on the window glass. At 9 years old, she had her mother's dark eyes and the same quiet way of observing the world that had first drawn Marcus to his wife all those years ago. The memory of Anna's laugh still caught him off guard sometimes, usually when he least expected it, turning ordinary moments sharp with loss. 3 years had passed since the accident. 3 years of learning to be both mother and father, of packed lunches and parent-teacher conferences, of braiding hair with clumsy fingers, and pretending he knew how to answer questions about growing up that he felt desperately unprepared to address. The highway stretched empty in both directions, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through terrain that looked like the surface of Mars, all rust-colored rock and scrub brush clinging to existence. They were headed home to their small ranch outside of town after a supply run, the truck bed loaded with fence posts and feed, the mundane necessities of their life. Marcus worked as a wilderness guide during tourist season, leading hiking expeditions through the canyonlands, but most of his income came from breeding horses, a skill his father had taught him decades ago, when the world seemed simpler and loss was something that happened to other people. That's when he saw the vehicle, a sleek sedan that had no business on this remote stretch of road, its front end buried in a wash where flash floods had carved channels through the desert floor. Steam rose from the crumpled hood, and even from a distance, Marcus could see the driver's door hanging open like a broken wing. His pulse quickened with the automatic alert that came from years of emergency response training. The certification he'd earned after Anna died, because he needed to feel like he could save someone, even if he'd been powerless to save her. "Dad, someone's hurt," Zoe said, her voice small but certain. Marcus was already pulling over, gravel crunching under his tires. "Stay in the truck," he instructed, grabbing the emergency kit he kept behind the seat. "Lock the doors until I come back." He approached cautiously, scanning for hazards the way his training had taught him, aware of the vulnerability of the situation, the isolation of their location. The woman lay several feet from the vehicle, and Marcus's breath caught when he saw her. She was maybe in her early 30s, dressed in what had once been an expensive business suit, now torn and dusty, her blonde hair matted with blood from a gash along her temple. But it was her face that stopped him, the bone structure unmistakable, even through the injuries and dirt. He'd seen that face on magazine covers in the grocery store checkout line, on billboards advertising luxury watches and designer perfume. The woman lying unconscious in the Nevada desert was Helena Fairmont, heiress to the Fairmont Industries fortune, one of the wealthiest families in the country. Her eyes fluttered open as he knelt beside her, unfocused at first, then sharpening with pain and confusion. "Where?" she tried to speak, wincing. "Don't move," Marcus said, his hands already checking for injuries with practiced efficiency. "I'm trained in emergency medicine. Can you tell me your name?" She stared at him, and he watched calculation move behind her eyes, despite the obvious pain. "Jane," she said finally. "My name is Jane." Marcus didn't challenge the lie. He could see the desperate fear in her expression, the way her gaze kept darting toward the road as if expecting pursuit. Whatever she was running from had driven her into the desert alone, and the crash had been violent enough to suggest speed, panic, desperation. "You have a concussion. Possibly broken ribs. We need to get you to a hospital." "No," the word came out sharp, almost panicked. "No hospitals. Please." Her hand gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "I can't. They'll find me." Marcus met her eyes, seeing the genuine terror there. He thought of Zoe waiting in the truck, of the responsibility he had to keep his daughter safe, of all the sensible reasons to call the authorities and walk away from whatever trouble this woman had brought into the desert. Then he thought of the times he'd needed help and found none, of the isolation that came with grief, of the desperate measures people took when they felt they had no other choice. "My daughter's in the truck," he said carefully. "If you come with us, you follow my rules. No danger to her, no lies that put us at risk. Understand?" Helena, still pretending to be Jane, nodded weakly. "I promise. I just need somewhere safe for a few days. Then I'll disappear, and you'll never see me again." Marcus stood, assessing the wreckage. The sedan was totaled, and he could see luggage scattered across the wash. expensive leather bags that confirmed his identification, even if her false name didn't. He gathered what he could carry, noted the lack of any purse or phone, the deliberate absence of identification. She'd been running prepared, or at least as prepared as someone could be when fleeing whatever wealth and power couldn't protect them from. He helped her to the truck, supporting most of her weight as she limped across the uneven ground. Zoe's face appeared in the window, eyes wide with concern and curiosity. "Is she going to be okay?" the girl asked as Marcus settled Helena into the back seat. "She's hurt, but she'll heal," Marcus replied, catching his daughter's eye in the rear-view mirror as he started the engine. "Her name is Jane. She's going to stay with us for a little while." Zoe studied their unexpected guest with the unsettling perception children sometimes possessed. She looked sad. Not just hurt sad, but heart sad. "Like you were after Mom died." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. The truck rumbled back onto the highway, carrying them toward home and whatever consequences this decision would bring. The ranch house sat at the end of a long dirt road, a modest structure his grandfather had built decades ago, all weathered wood and practical design. The barn stood behind it, and beyond that the corrals where his horses grazed in the evening light, their coats gleaming copper and gold. Marcus had always found peace here, in the simplicity of physical work and the honest companionship of animals that demanded nothing more complicated than food, water, and gentle handling. He helped Helena inside, settling her on the worn sofa that still bore the faint scent of Anna's favorite lavender soap, a smell that had somehow persisted years after her death. Zoe hovered nearby, her natural shyness warring with concern for the stranger who had suddenly entered their world. "I'll make up the guest room," Marcus said. "But first, let me look at those injuries properly." The bathroom light was harsh and clinical as he cleaned the wound on Helena's temple, his fingers gentle, despite the size of his hands, calloused from rope and leather and years of outdoor work. She winced, but didn't pull away, studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You know who I am," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Marcus continued his work, applying butterfly bandages with careful precision. "I know who you're supposed to be. I don't know who you actually are. That's an interesting distinction. It's the only one that matters out here." He stepped back, assessing his work. "You'll have a scar, but it should heal clean. The ribs are probably bruised, not broken." "You're lucky," Helena laughed, a sound without humor. "Lucky isn't the word I'd use." She met his eyes. "Why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you demand answers?" "Because I've learned that everyone's running from something," Marcus said. "Some demons wear badges, and some wear business suits. I don't know your story, but I recognize desperation when I see it." 3 days, he continued. "That's what I'll give you. Time to rest, heal, figure out your next move. After that, you need to leave. Not because I don't want to help, but because I have a daughter to protect." "I understand," Helena whispered. "And thank you for not seeing a headline when you saw me. I saw someone who needed help. That's all." Over the next 2 days, an unexpected rhythm developed. Helena mostly rested, her body demanding recovery, despite her mind's obvious agitation. Marcus noticed how she startled at unexpected sounds, how her eyes tracked toward windows whenever vehicles passed on the distant highway, how she seemed perpetually poised for flight. But he also noticed softer moments, the way her expression eased when Zoe brought her books to read, how she listened with genuine attention when his daughter explained her rock collection or demonstrated the proper way to braid a horse's mane. On the third morning, Marcus found Helena in the kitchen before dawn, standing at the window and watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. She'd borrowed one of his flannel shirts and a pair of jeans that hung loose on her frame, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that made her look younger, more vulnerable than the polished heiress from magazine covers. "Couldn't sleep," she explained when she noticed him. "I'm not used to this much quiet. In the city, there's always noise, sirens, traffic, people. Out here, it's like the world is holding its breath." Marcus poured 2 cups of coffee, handing her one. "Some people find the silence uncomfortable. Others find it healing. Which are you?" Helena wrapped her hands around the mug, absorbing its warmth. "I don't know yet." They stood in companionable silence, and Marcus found himself studying her profile, the elegant line of her jaw, the way exhaustion had carved shadows beneath her eyes. He'd spent 2 years actively avoiding any awareness of women as anything other than fellow parents or customers, his grief for Anna creating a barrier he hadn't tried to breach. But something about Helena's presence disrupted that careful numbness, made him aware of his own isolation in ways he'd been successfully ignoring. "You're wondering what I'm running from," Helena said, still watching the sunrise. Marcus took a sip of coffee. "Only if you want to tell me." "My family," she said simply. "The weight of their expectations. The cage of their control." She turned to face him. "Do you know what it's like to have every choice made for you? Every friendship evaluated for advantage? Every relationship assessed for strategic benefit? To look in the mirror and wonder if the person staring back is real or just a carefully constructed puppet?" "I know what it's like to feel trapped," Marcus said. "Not by money or power, but by grief. After my wife died, I spent months just going through motions. Zoe needed me, so I kept functioning, but I wasn't really present. I was just a ghost pretending to be alive." "What changed?" "One morning, Zoe asked me if I was going to disappear like Mommy did. She wasn't crying, just asking. Like it was a reasonable question." Marcus's voice roughened with the memory. "That's when I realized my daughter needed a father, not a memorial to her mother." Helena's eyes glistened. "How do you just decide to be present again? You don't decide once. You decide every day, sometimes every hour. It's not dramatic or heroic. It's just the accumulation of small choices. To show up, to try, to stay." Before Helena could respond, Zoe appeared in the doorway, rumpled from sleep, and clutching the stuffed horse Marcus had given her on her 8th birthday. "Morning, Dad." "Morning, Jane?" The girl climbed into a chair. "Are you feeling better?" Helena smiled, and Marcus noticed how it transformed her face. "Much better. Your father takes good care of people." "He takes good care of everything," Zoe said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "The horses, me, the ranch. Even the baby birds that fall out of their nests." Over breakfast, Zoe chattered about her upcoming school project, a presentation on desert ecosystems that had her both excited and anxious. Helena listened with surprising engagement, asking thoughtful questions and offering suggestions that revealed an education far beyond what her socialite reputation suggested. "You really know a lot about ecology," Zoe observed. "Did you study it in college?" Helena hesitated. "I studied a lot of things. Business, economics, art history. But the things I'm most interested in were never part of any curriculum." "Like what?" "Like how people survive in places that seem impossible. How life finds ways to exist in deserts and deep oceans and frozen tundras." She glanced at Marcus. "Resilience interests me. Adaptation." Later that morning, Marcus worked in the barn while Helena rested, and Zoe completed homework at the kitchen table. He was repairing a broken stall door when he heard the sound of an engine, unfamiliar and out of place. Through the barn's open door, he watched a black sedan pull up to the house, expensive and incongruous against the ranch's rustic backdrop. 2 men emerged, dressed in suits that screamed corporate security or private investigation. Marcus's pulse quickened. He moved quickly but calmly toward the house, intercepting the men before they reached the porch. "Can I help you?" he asked, positioning himself to block their path. "We're looking for someone," the taller man said, producing a photograph. "Helena Fairmont. She may be injured, confused. Her family is very worried." Marcus studied the photo, which showed Helena at some formal event, dripping with jewelry and false smiles. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description. This is pretty remote. Don't get many visitors." The second man's eyes were cold, assessing. "Her vehicle was found about 15 miles from here, abandoned after an accident. We're canvassing the area. Like I said, haven't seen her, but I'll keep an eye out." The men exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. "It's very important we find her, Mr. Chen." The taller man had done his research, knew Marcus's name. "Her family can provide substantial compensation for information leading to her location." "I don't need compensation." The men lingered, clearly debating whether to push harder. Finally, the taller one handed Marcus a business card. "If you see anything, please call. It's for her own protection." After they left, Marcus found Helena standing in the hallway, her face pale. "You heard?" She nodded. "They're not from my family. At least, not officially." Her voice trembled. "They work for my uncle. He controls the family business now that my father's dead. Controls me. Or tries to." Marcus waited, letting her find her words. 6 months ago, I discovered irregularities in company accounts, millions being moved through shell corporations, deals with criminal organizations. She wrapped her arms around herself. When I confronted my uncle, he smiled and said I could either cooperate and enjoy my inheritance, or have an unfortunate accident like my father did. You think he killed your father? I know he did, but I can't prove it, not yet. She met Marcus's eyes. I've been gathering evidence, making copies of files, building a case, but I needed time to get everything in order before going to the authorities. When he found out what I was doing, I had to run. The 3 days Marcus had promised suddenly felt impossibly short. That evening, after Zoe was asleep, he and Helena sat on the porch steps, watching stars emerge in the vast darkness overhead. The desert night was cool, and Marcus noticed Helena shiver, offering her the jacket he draped over the railing. I should leave tomorrow, she said. I've put you and Zoe in enough danger already. Those men will be back. Marcus had been thinking the same thing, weighing his daughter's safety against the pull he felt toward this woman who'd crashed into their lives. But sitting beside Helena under the infinite sky, he found himself saying something different. What if he stayed a little longer? Use the time to finalize your evidence. Build your case properly. Helena looked at him. Surprise evident. Why would you risk that? Because Zoe's right. I take care of things that need protecting. He met her gaze. And because, for the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm fully awake. Like someone reminded me there's more to life than just getting through the day. I can't ask you to do this. You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference. Over the following week, the ranch became a fortress disguised as ordinary life. Marcus taught Helena to ride, ostensibly as therapy for her healing ribs, but really as a cover for teaching her the land, showing her escape routes and hiding places in the canyons beyond their property. She proved a natural horsewoman, her initial fear giving way to competence, and then to genuine joy as she learned to move with the animal rather than against it. Zoe appointed herself Helena's guide to ranch life, teaching her how to collect eggs from their small chicken coop, explaining the personalities of each horse, and showing her the secret spot by the creek where smooth stones perfect for painting could be found. Marcus watched his daughter bloom under Helena's attention, saw the grief that had shadowed Zoe since her mother's death, ease in the presence of this woman who listened with full presence and spoke to her as an equal rather than a child to be managed. In the evenings, after Zoe was asleep, Marcus and Helena would sit together on the porch or in the living room, initially maintaining careful distance but gradually drifting closer as comfort replaced caution. Helena told him about her life before the running, the suffocating expectations of wealth, the way money created isolation rather than connection. I had everything except freedom, she said one night. Every friend came with suspicion about their motives. Every man who expressed interest could have been after the fortune. I was so lonely I used to have dinner parties just so the house would feel occupied. Then I'd spend the next day exhausted from performing. Marcus shared his own story, the joy of meeting Anna at a wilderness medicine conference, her laughter and competence, and the way she'd chosen our simple life without hesitation or regret. Talking about her still hurt, but the pain had changed quality, becoming something he could hold rather than something that held him. She would have liked you, he said, surprised by the truth of it. Anna always gravitated toward people who were authentic, who didn't perform. Helena smiled. I think I would have liked her too. Any woman who chose this life, this peace, understood something important. The moments stretched between them, loaded with awareness. Marcus became conscious of how close they were sitting, how the lamplight caught gold in Helena's hair, how her expression had softened from the terrified woman he'd found in the desert. This is complicated, he said quietly. I know, Helena replied, but she didn't move away. 2 weeks after Helena's arrival, the precarious peace shattered. Marcus was working on the north fence line when his phone rang, the ranch's landline, which Zoe knew to only use for emergencies. Dad, his daughter's voice was tight with barely controlled fear. There are men here, 3 of them. They're asking for Jane and they won't leave. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Where's Helena? Hiding in the barn loft. Like you showed us. Stay on the phone. Stay in your room with the door locked. I'm coming. He covered the distance to the ranch house in his truck, dust roiling behind him, his mind calculating scenarios and options. Through the living room window, he could see the men Helena's uncle had sent, and these were different from the initial investigators. These were enforcers, bodies language radiating threat, barely constrained by the fiction of civility. Marcus entered through the kitchen door, moving quickly to Zoe's room. His daughter sat on her bed, phone clutched in white-knuckled hands, trying to be brave. You did exactly right, he told her, pulling her into a fierce hug. Stay here. Whatever happens, stay in this room. The men were searching the house when Marcus confronted them in the living room, rage giving his voice an edge that made the nearest man step back. This is my home. You have no right to be here. We have every right, the leader said, a man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Helena Fairmont is wanted for theft of corporate property. We're authorized to retrieve her by any means necessary. She's not here. The man smiled without warmth. We'll determine that ourselves. Marcus moved to block the hallway leading to the bedrooms. No, you won't. You'll leave now, or I'll call the sheriff. The implied threat hung in the air. For a moment, Marcus thought they might back down, that the risk of law enforcement involvement would outweigh their desire to search. Then the man's expression hardened, and he nodded to his companions. The attack was sudden, but not unexpected. Marcus had been preparing for this possibility. Had spent evenings after Helena slept reviewing defensive tactics he'd learned years ago in wilderness survival training. The first man who reached for him found himself redirected into the wall with enough force to crack plaster. The second received an elbow to the solar plexus that left him gasping. But there were three of them, and one of Marcus, and the leader pulled a gun. Enough, the man said, aiming at Marcus's chest. Where is she? Marcus's mind raced, calculating odds and outcomes. Then a voice from the doorway stopped everyone. I'm here. Don't hurt them. Helena stood framed by afternoon light, her posture straight despite the fear Marcus could see in the tension of her shoulders. She'd transformed from the woman learning to ride horses into the heiress he'd seen on magazine covers, all cold authority and calculated poise. Let's go, the leader said. Your uncle is very disappointed in your behavior. Helena didn't move. I'm not going anywhere until I show you something. She held up a flash drive. Every file you're looking for, every piece of evidence I've gathered, it's all here. The man's eyes locked on the drive. Give it to me. Helena smiled, and there was nothing warm in the expression. This is a copy. The originals are already with 3 different law firms, 3 different journalists, and the FBI. Time released. If I don't check in every 12 hours, they all receive instructions to publish and prosecute. You're bluffing. Test me. The standoff lasted heartbeats that felt like hours. Finally, the leader lowered his weapon. Your uncle will hear about this. Tell him I look forward to his call. And tell him that if anyone I care about is harmed, every secret in those files becomes public knowledge immediately. After the men left, Marcus found his hands shaking with delayed adrenaline. Helena crossed to him, her own fear finally showing now that the performance was over. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant to bring this to your door. I should have left sooner. Marcus cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away tears she probably didn't know she was crying. You had nowhere else to go. We all need sanctuary sometimes. She leaned into his touch, and the kiss that followed felt inevitable, a culmination of 2 weeks of growing connection and shared vulnerability. When they finally pulled apart, Zoe stood in the hallway, a small smile on her face. Does this mean Jane is staying? Helena looked at Marcus, question in her eyes. He thought of the risks, of the complications, of all the sensible reasons this was impossible. Then he thought of how empty his life had felt before she arrived, of how Zoe had laughed more in 2 weeks than she had in 2 years, of how he felt present and alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible. For now, he said, we'll figure out the rest together. The next morning, Helena made calls to the law firms and journalists she'd mentioned, this time actually establishing the dead man's switch she'd bluffed about. Marcus contacted a lawyer friend from his guide service days, someone with experience in whistleblower protection and complex corporate cases. They spent the day transforming desperation into strategy, fear into action. That evening, 3 days after the confrontation, Helena's phone rang with a number she recognized. Her uncle's personal line. She answered on speaker, Marcus beside her, his solid presence an anchor. Helena. Her uncle's voice was smooth, conciliatory. We seem to have had a misunderstanding. I think we understand each other perfectly, Helena replied. The question is whether you're ready to accept reality. There was a long pause. What do you want? Full independence. A separation of my inheritance from company control. And a complete audit of all financial dealings for the past 5 years. That's not possible. Then prepare for federal investigation and public scandal. I'd rather destroy the company than let you continue using it for criminal enterprise. Another pause. Longer this time. You've changed. Yes, I have. We'll draw up papers. But Helena, this isn't over. You're right, she said. It's just beginning. But from now on, I'm the one writing the story. 3 months later, the legal settlement was finalized. Helena received her inheritance, independent of company control, along with enough evidence of her uncle's malfeasance to ensure he'd never risk exposure by troubling her again. The FBI investigation was ongoing, but Helena was free, financially and legally emancipated from the family that had caged her. She could have gone anywhere, done anything. Instead, she stood in the barn at sunset, watching Marcus teach Zoe how to gentle a new foal. The girl's laughter echoed off the rafters, pure and unself-conscious. When Marcus looked up and caught Helena's eye, the smile he gave her was slow and warm, full of promise and possibility. "You're staying," Zoe said later that evening. It wasn't a question, but Helena answered anyway. "If that's okay with you." Zoe pretended to consider seriously. "Well, you're getting better at writing, and you make Dad smile the way he used to with Mom. Plus, you're teaching me about business stuff, which is cool." Her expression softened. "And I like having you here. You make our family feel complete again." Helena felt tears threaten. She'd spent her entire life in a family that was really a corporation, where love was transaction and connection was strategy. Now she sat in a weathered ranch house, with a man who'd chosen to help a stranger and a girl who offered acceptance without conditions, and for the first time understood what family actually meant. Marcus came to sit beside her on the porch that night after Zoe was asleep, the stars infinite overhead. "No regrets?" he asked. "About giving up the penthouse, the parties, the life you had before?" "I never had a life before," Helena said. "I had an existence. There's a difference." She leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. "This is the first time I've felt real in years. Maybe ever." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert. The distant call of a coyote, the whisper of wind through scrub brush, the gentle sounds of horses settling in the barn. Helena thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, trapped in luxury and terrified of freedom. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone she'd played on television, a role she'd finally been brave enough to abandon. "I love you," Marcus said quietly. "I probably shouldn't. It's too soon. Too complicated. But I do." Helena turned to face him. "I love you too. And you're right, it is too soon and too complicated," she smiled. "Good thing we have time to figure it out." 1 year later, Helena stood in the ranch house kitchen, flour dusting her hands as she attempted to recreate the pie recipe Anna had left in a worn notebook Marcus kept in the cupboard. Through the window, she could see Zoe helping Marcus with the morning feeding, the girl's confidence with the horses a testament to how she'd grown in the past months. The ranch had changed under Helena's influence. Not through money, though she'd quietly established trust for Zoe's education and the ranch's maintenance, but through presence. She'd discovered a talent for business that extended to the horse breeding operation, helping Marcus expand into training services that leveraged her connections while maintaining the integrity he valued. The pie was cooling on the counter when the door burst open and Zoe rushed in, breathless with excitement. Dad said, "Yes, we can go on the camping trip next weekend." Helena smiled at her stepdaughter. The legal adoption papers had been finalized 3 months ago, another milestone in their unconventional family's journey. Better start packing then. Remember to bring warm layers. The canyon gets cold at night. Zoe hugged her impulsively. "Thanks for being here, Mom." The title still made Helena's heart skip. She'd never expected to be anyone's mother, had assumed that path was closed to someone as damaged by wealth and isolation as she'd been. But Zoe had simply decided Helena belonged, had started calling her Mom without ceremony or fanfare, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Marcus appeared in the doorway, taking in the domestic scene with obvious contentment. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," Helena replied, and meant it. That evening, after dinner and homework and the comfortable routines they'd established, Marcus found Helena standing at the bedroom window, looking out at the desert night. She wore one of his old shirts, her feet bare, hair loose around her shoulders. A year ago, she'd been running through this same landscape, terrified and alone. Now she stood in a home she'd helped build, surrounded by love she'd learned to accept and return. "You're thinking loud," Marcus said, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Just remembering." She leaned back against him. "The woman I used to be feels like someone I read about in a book. someone who made different choices, lived a different life. Do you miss any of it? The access, the influence? Sometimes, Helena admitted. But then I remember what it cost. The constant vigilance, the inability to trust, the loneliness that felt like drowning. She turned in his arms. This life, this quiet, ordinary life, is worth more than anything I left behind. Marcus kissed her forehead. It's not ordinary to me, she smiled. No, I suppose it's not. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Not threatening this time, but curious. A journalist working on a follow-up story about Helena's disappearance and dramatic exposure of corporate corruption wanted an interview. Marcus tensed, his protective instincts immediately activated, but Helena surprised him by agreeing. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah, set up her recorder at the kitchen table while Zoe sat quietly in the living room, ostensibly doing homework but clearly listening. Tell me about the night you disappeared, Sarah began. What made you finally run? Helena considered her answer carefully. I'd been trapped my entire life by wealth and expectation. Running wasn't about escaping danger, though that was part of it. It was about finally claiming the right to choose my own path. And you chose this. Sarah gestured around the modest kitchen, her tone neutral but the implication clear. You had unlimited resources, and you chose a horse ranch in the desert. Helena's smile was genuine. I chose freedom. I chose authenticity. She glanced toward where Zoe sat, then at Marcus standing in the doorway. I chose family. The article, when it was published 2 weeks later, sparked unexpected attention. Helena's story of leaving wealth for love resonated with readers tired of the glorification of luxury, and several major publications reached out requesting interviews, book deals, speaking engagements. Helena declined most of them, but accepted a few, carefully selecting opportunities that aligned with her values and allowed her to advocate for corporate accountability and transparency. Marcus watched his wife navigate this new phase with pride. She'd learned to balance the public interest in her story with the private life they'd built, never allowing the spotlight to disrupt the foundation of their family. When she did give interviews or speeches, she always came home to the ranch, to him and Zoe, shedding the public persona like an uncomfortable coat and returning to the woman who knew how to mend fences and gentle horses. On their first anniversary, Marcus took Helena back to the spot where he'd found her, the wash where her car had crashed. The vehicle was long gone, towed away and scrapped, but the marks remained, gouges in the earth that time was slowly erasing. Standing there, you ever think about what would have happened if I just called the police that day? Marcus asked, followed protocol instead of instinct. Helena squeezed his hand. I think I would have been found by my uncle's people before any legitimate authorities arrived. I think I might not have survived. She looked at him. You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me a life worth living. I gave you a chance, Marcus corrected. You did the rest. They stood together in the desert, the landscape that had witnessed Helena's lowest moment, now a testament to transformation. The evening sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and in the distance, the ranch house stood solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where Zoe was probably starting dinner, having declared herself in charge of the evening meal. I never believed in fate, Helena said. Growing up, everything felt manufactured, controlled. But standing here now, looking at how everything unfolded, it's hard not to feel like some larger force was at work. Maybe it was just luck, Marcus replied. Good timing, right place, right time. Or maybe, Helena said, turning to face him, sometimes the universe gives us exactly what we need, even if we didn't know we needed it. 2 years after Helena's arrival, the ranch had become something neither Marcus nor Helena had initially envisioned, but both had contributed to creating. They'd expanded the horse breeding operation and added a small riding therapy program for children with trauma, combining Marcus's wilderness medicine background with Helena's understanding of healing through connection. Zoe, now 11, had become an integral part of the program, her natural empathy and skill with horses making her an ideal assistant instructor. Helena watched her stepdaughter work with a shy 8-year-old boy, coaxing him to trust both the horse and himself, and marveled at the resilience of children, their capacity to heal and grow when given safe space and genuine care. The program had attracted attention from social services and therapy organizations, and Helena found herself using her business acumen to establish a nonprofit that could sustain and expand their work. It felt right. Using the wealth she'd inherited to create something meaningful, to help others find the healing she'd found in this unlikely place. Marcus sometimes stood at the edge of the training ring, watching his wife and daughter work together, and felt a completeness he'd never imagined possible after Anna's death. He'd loved Anna deeply, and that love hadn't diminished, but he'd learned that the heart's capacity wasn't fixed, that new love didn't erase old love, but existed alongside it, expanding rather than replacing. One evening, as they prepared for bed, Helena mentioned something that had been on her mind for weeks. "I've been thinking about adoption again. There are children in the foster system who could benefit from what we're building here. Kids who need space and stability and a chance to heal." Marcus pulled her close. "You want to expand our family?" Helena nodded against his chest. "Zoe's growing up. The ranch has room. And I keep thinking about the children we work with, the ones who don't have safe homes to return to. We could offer that. It's not a small decision," Marcus said carefully. "I know, but we've built something strong here, something that could hold more love, more life." They talked late into the night, discussing practicalities and fears, dreams and logistics. By morning, they decided to pursue it, to open their home and hearts to children who needed what they'd found together. The process was lengthy. Background checks and home studies, interviews and training. But eventually, on a crisp autumn afternoon, they welcomed two siblings into their home, a 7-year-old girl and her 9-year-old brother, both carrying trauma and hope in equal measure. Zoe took to being a big sister with characteristic intensity, showing the younger girl her rock collection and teaching the boy how to approach the gentlest of their horses. Helena watched her family expand and transform, marveling at how love multiplied rather than divided, how opening their lives to these children enriched rather than depleted. 3 years after the desert rescue, Helena stood on the stage at a conference on corporate ethics, invited to speak about her experience exposing corruption and building a life of purpose. The audience was packed with business leaders and activists, journalists and academics, all eager to hear from the heiress who'd walked away from billions to find authenticity. "I used to believe power came from wealth and position," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I thought influence required access to boardrooms and social circles. But I've learned that real power comes from connection, from building something meaningful with people you care about. The transformation doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in the accumulation of small choices to show up, to be present, to choose authenticity over performance." She told her story without embellishment, the fear and desperation of running, the unexpected sanctuary she'd found, the slow process of learning to trust and be trusted. When questions came, she answered honestly, acknowledging mistakes and uncertainties alongside successes. After the presentation, a young woman approached, maybe 25, dressed in an expensive suit that looked like armor. "I'm supposed to take over my family's company next year," she said quietly. "Everyone says I should be grateful for the opportunity, but all I feel is trapped." Helena recognized herself in the woman's expression, the careful composure hiding desperation. "What do you want?" "Freedom to choose. To know that my life belongs to me, not to a legacy or expectation." "Then fight for it," Helena said. "Not by running necessarily, though sometimes that's required, but by refusing to accept that wealth and position mean you forfeit the right to self-determination. It won't be easy. People will call you ungrateful, selfish, irresponsible, but your life is yours to live." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." I needed to hear that from someone who understands. Helena watched her walk away and felt the weight of responsibility and possibility. Her story had become larger than her individual experience, had somehow given others permission to question the narratives they had been handed. It wasn't a role she'd sought, but she found herself willing to carry it. Marcus met her at the airport, Zoe beside him, both wearing matching grins. The new kids, whose names were Maya and Chris, hung back shyly, still uncertain of their place in this family. Helena knelt to their level. "I missed you both. Did you take good care of the horses while I was gone?" Maya nodded solemnly. "We helped feed them every day. And I brushed copper all by myself," Chris added with pride. Helena pulled them into a hug, feeling their initial stiffness gradually ease. Trust took time. She'd learned that herself. But they had time, now, all of them, Time to build and heal and become the family they were choosing to be. That night, after the children were asleep, Helena and Marcus sat on the porch steps, the desert night embracing them with familiar darkness. 4 years ago, I was driving through this landscape trying to outrun my entire life, Helena said. If someone had told me I'd end up here, doing this, being this person, I would have thought they were insane. Marcus took her hand. And now? Now I can't imagine being anyone else or anywhere else. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You know what the strangest part is? What? In all my years of wealth and privilege, surrounded by luxury and possibility, I was never as rich as I am now. With a used truck, a ranch that barely breaks even, and a family we cobbled together from broken pieces, Marcus kissed the top of her head. Maybe that's what real wealth is. Not what you have, but what you'd fight to keep. The ranch had its challenges, financial pressures and physical demands, difficult weather, and difficult moments. But those challenges were real, unmediated by wealth or position. When they succeeded, it was through effort and collaboration. When they failed, they learned and tried again. There was an authenticity to struggle that luxury had never provided. 5 years after the desert rescue, the riding therapy program had expanded beyond anything Helena and Marcus had initially envisioned. They'd built a second barn specifically for the program, with an indoor arena that allowed year-round operation. The nonprofit Helena established had attracted grants and donations, allowing them to offer services regardless of families' ability to pay. Zoe, now 13, had become a certified junior instructor, working alongside her parents with a maturity that sometimes startled Helena. The girl who'd lost her mother at 6 had transformed grief into purpose, using her experience to connect with children navigating their own traumas. Maya and Chris, now 10 and 12, had blossomed in ways that made Helena's heart ache with gratitude. Maya's initial shyness had given way to a fierce determination and love for the horses that rivaled even Zoe's. Chris had discovered a talent for mechanics, spending hours with Marcus, learning to maintain equipment and vehicles, finding in the practical work a sense of competence and value. They'd adopted the children officially after 2 years, a ceremony that felt more significant than any corporate achievement Helena had ever experienced. Standing in the courthouse, listening to the judge declare them a family in the eyes of the law, Helena had understood finally what she'd been searching for all those years. Not power or influence or recognition, but belonging. The sense that her presence mattered not for what she could provide, but for who she was. One afternoon, Helena received an unexpected call from her uncle's lawyer. Her uncle had died, the man explained, and despite their estrangement, he'd left Helena a letter to be delivered after his death. She held the envelope for 3 days before opening it, uncertain whether she wanted to engage with that chapter of her past. Finally, with Marcus beside her for support, she broke the seal. The letter was surprisingly brief. Helena, it began, I won't pretend to regret my choices or apologize for actions I still believe were justified. Business requires hard decisions and harder compromises. But I will acknowledge that you had courage I lacked, the courage to walk away from power when it required sacrificing your integrity. You built something real with your life. I built an empire on sand, and it's crumbling now, destroyed by the same corruption I once thought necessary. Perhaps you were right after all. The letter wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was acknowledgement. Helena folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer with other mementos of her past life, artifacts of who she'd been before the desert. I don't forgive him, she told Marcus. What he did to my father, the fear he created, the lives he damaged. That's not erasable, but I understand him better now. How easy it is to justify terrible choices when you're convinced the stakes are high enough. Marcus wrapped his arm around her shoulders. You chose differently. That's what matters. The ranch continued its steady rhythm, seasons marking time through the work they required. Spring brought foaling season and the exhausting joy of new life. Summer meant long days with therapy sessions and trail rides. Fall brought preparation for winter's challenges, repairing structures and stockpiling supplies. Winter itself was quieter, time for maintenance and planning, for the slower pace that allowed reflection. Helena discovered she loved the cyclical nature of ranch life, the way each season built on the last, the connection to rhythms larger than human ambition. She'd spent years chasing growth and expansion, measuring success in acquisitions and market share. Now she measured it in children's progress, in horses, health, and the strength of her family's bonds. 6 years after her arrival, Helena stood in the barn at dawn, the familiar smell of hay and horses grounding her in the present. Through the open door, she could see Marcus and Chris working on a fence repair, their easy collaboration a testament to the relationship they'd built. In the house, Maya was helping Zoe prepare breakfast, the two girls laughing over some private joke. This was her empire now, Helena thought. Not boardrooms and profit margins, but this messy, complicated, beautiful accumulation of daily choices to show up and try and care. It wasn't the life anyone would have predicted for the Fairmont heiress, but it was hers in ways nothing else had ever been. Her phone buzzed with a message from the young woman she'd spoken to at the conference 2 years ago. The message included a photo of her standing in front of a small nonprofit organization, having chosen purpose over dynasty, authenticity over expectation. "Thank you for showing me it was possible," the text read. Helena smiled, sending back a simple reply. "Thank you for having the courage to try." That evening, the family gathered for dinner around the worn kitchen table that had witnessed countless meals and conversations. Maya shared news about a particularly challenging therapy session she'd observed, asking thoughtful questions about trauma and healing. Chris talked about a repair technique he'd learned, his pride in the skill evident. Zoe mentioned college applications, her plans to study equine therapy formally, to build on what she'd learned at home. Marcus caught Helena's eye across the table, and in his expression she saw a reflection of her own contentment. They'd built this together, starting from the moment he'd chosen to help a stranger in the desert, accumulating through thousands of small decisions and efforts into something neither could have created alone. After dinner, Helena found herself back on the porch, the desert night spread before her in familiar vastness. She thought about the woman she'd been 7 years ago, desperate and terrified, convinced her only option was to run until she found safety. That woman hadn't understood that safety wasn't a place to be found, but a condition to be created, built through trust and vulnerability, and the daily practice of choosing connection over isolation. Marcus joined her, settling into the comfortable silence they'd long since mastered. He taught her that silence didn't need to be filled, that presence itself was communication. "Thank you," Helena said quietly, "for everything, but especially for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Marcus took her hand. "Thank you for trusting me enough to stay." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, filling the sky with light that had traveled vast distances to reach them. Helena thought about distance and arrival, about the journeys people took to find their way home. Her journey had required losing everything she thought defined her, stripping away wealth and position and certainty until only her essential self remained. In that vulnerability, she discovered strength she'd never known she possessed. The ranch would never make headlines or appear on lists of corporate achievements. Their family would never grace magazine covers or attend charity galas. But here, in this quiet corner of the desert, they'd built something that mattered more than visibility or recognition. They'd created a space where broken things could heal, where lost people could be found, where love multiplied through the simple act of choosing each other, again and again, day after ordinary day. 7 years after the crash, Helena woke before dawn to find Marcus already up, standing at the bedroom window. She joined him, following his gaze to where the first hints of light were touching the horizon. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is our life," he said softly. "That you're here, that we built all of this." Helena wrapped her arms around him from behind. "Believe it, this is real, the most real thing I've ever known." As the sun rose over the desert, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber, Helena felt the final pieces of her old self dissolve. The frightened woman who'd crashed in the desert 7 years ago, the isolated heiress who'd never understood genuine connection, these were chapters in her story, but no longer her identity. She was Helena Chen now, not Fairmont. Wife, mother, partner in building something meaningful. The change wasn't just in her name, but in the fundamental understanding of who she was and what mattered. Later that morning, as the family prepared for the day's work, a car pulled up the drive. Helena tensed automatically, old fears resurfacing before she recognized the visitor. Sarah, the journalist who'd interviewed her years ago, emerged with camera equipment and a warm smile. "I'm doing a follow-up piece," she explained. 7 years later, checking in on where people are now, if you're willing. Helena glanced at Marcus, who nodded his support. They spent the day showing Sarah the ranch, the therapy program, introducing her to the children and horses that comprised their world. Helena spoke honestly about the challenges, the financial pressures and emotional demands, the moments of doubt and difficulty. But she also spoke about the rewards, immeasurable in dollars but infinite in meaning. At sunset, Sarah asked her final question. Knowing everything you know now, would you make the same choice? Would you run into the desert again? Helena considered carefully. I'd like to think I'd be brave enough to make the difficult choice regardless. But honestly, I don't know if I would have had the courage, without desperation, forcing my hand. She paused. What I do know is that I'm grateful, every single day, for the series of events that brought me here. For the crash, for Marcus finding me, for every moment that led to this life. That's not regret? Sarah pressed. For everything you gave up? Helena smiled. You can't regret losing something you never really had. I thought I had power and success and achievement, but what I actually had was performance and isolation and fear. What I have now is real. The article ran with photos of the ranch, of Helena working with the horses, of the family gathered for dinner. The headline read, "The Heiress Who Found Wealth in the Desert," and the piece explored not just Helena's journey, but the larger questions about success and value, about what constitutes a life well lived. The response was overwhelming. Letters arrived from people around the world, sharing their own stories of leaving behind expectations, of choosing authenticity over appearance. Some wrote seeking advice, others simply wanting to express gratitude, for permission to imagine different possibilities. Helena tried to respond to as many as possible, understanding the power of acknowledgement, of being seen and heard in one's struggle. One letter particularly moved her, from a teenage girl whose parents were pressuring her toward a prestigious career she didn't want. Your story showed me it's okay to disappoint people by being yourself, the girl wrote. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard. Helena kept that letter pinned above her desk, a reminder of why sharing her story mattered, of the responsibility that came with having survived and found healing. 8 years after the desert rescue, the ranch faced its greatest challenge. A severe drought stressed their water resources, threatening both the horses and the therapy program. Helena's first instinct was to solve the problem with money, to drill deeper wells or install expensive conservation systems. But Marcus reminded her gently that their way had always been different, that solutions built with community rather than capital created stronger foundations. They reached out to neighboring ranches, to environmental organizations, to the families they'd served through the therapy program. The response was humbling. Volunteers arrived to help install water-saving systems. Local engineers donated expertise. Families they'd worked with organized fundraisers and resource drives. In 3 months, they'd weathered the crisis, not through individual wealth, but through collective effort. The ranch, sustained by the network of relationships they'd built over years of service and presence. Standing in the barn one evening, watching the children water the horses with careful conservation, Helena understood something fundamental. Real security didn't come from bank accounts or individual resources. It came from connection, from building relationships strong enough to weather difficulties together. The lesson felt obvious in retrospect, but it had taken her 40 years and a complete life transformation to truly understand it. 9 years after her arrival, Helena and Marcus sat in a lawyer's office, finalizing paperwork that would transform their informal therapy program into a sustainable nonprofit with permanent funding. Helena had structured it carefully, using her inheritance to create an endowment that would outlast her involvement, that would ensure the work continued regardless of individual circumstances. This is your legacy, the lawyer observed, what you'll be remembered for. Helena glanced at Marcus. This is our present. The legacy can take care of itself. On the drive home, Marcus asked, do you ever wonder what your life would have looked like if you'd stayed? If you'd found a way to expose your uncle without running? Helena watched the desert landscape pass, so familiar now she could navigate it with her eyes closed. Sometimes. But I think I needed to lose everything to understand what actually mattered. Running wasn't just about escaping danger. It was about escaping the person I'd become, the life I'd accepted as inevitable. That night she found Zoe in the barn, grooming one of the therapy horses with meditative focus. Her daughter, nearly 16 now, had her father's steady hands and Anna's gentle presence, combined with her own fierce determination. You're thinking about college, Helena observed, settling onto a nearby bale of hay. Zoe nodded. I want to study equine therapy, maybe psychology too. But I keep thinking about leaving here, leaving all of this. Helena remembered her own desperate flight, the terror and exhilaration of choosing the unknown over the familiar. Going away doesn't mean leaving behind. You carry this place with you, these lessons, this foundation, and you can always come home. Will you be okay if I go? If I choose something different? Helena felt tears threaten. Zoe, the greatest gift you can give us is to become fully yourself, wherever that leads. We didn't build this family to keep you trapped. We built it to give you wings. The gathering filled the ranch with laughter and conversation, children playing in the corrals while adults shared stories and memories. Sarah the journalist came, now a friend rather than just professional contact. The young woman Helena had spoken to at the conference attended with her partner, having built her own nonprofit focused on ethical business practices. As the sun set, casting the desert in its familiar golden light, Helena stood slightly apart from the celebration, taking it all in. Marcus found her there, as he always did, understanding her need for these moments of observation and reflection. 10 years, he said, a decade of miracles. Helena leaned against him. Not miracles, just choices. The choice to help a stranger, the choice to trust, the choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. Choices made and remade, day after day. They watched their family, biological and chosen, gathered in celebration of what they'd built together. Chris was teaching a younger child how to properly approach a horse. Maya was deep in conversation with a therapy client about managing anxiety. Zoe moved through the crowd with grace, connecting people and facilitating conversations, already practicing the leadership that would define her future. This is enough, Helena said quietly. More than enough. It's everything. Marcus kissed her temple. Yes, it is. As night fell and stars emerged overhead, the gathering continued with music and stories. Laughter echoing across the desert that had witnessed Helena's transformation. She danced with Marcus under the infinite sky, feeling the solid reality of his presence, the certainty of their connection. This was the life she'd fought for, the life she'd chosen against all probability and expectation. Not a fairy tale ending, but something more valuable, a daily practice of showing up and trying and loving, despite difficulty and uncertainty. Later, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Helena walked out to the spot where Marcus had first found her, where her desperate flight had ended in injury and unconscious vulnerability. The wash was peaceful in the moonlight, no trace remaining of the crashed vehicle or her terror. She'd avoided this place for years, associated with trauma and fear, but tonight it felt right to return, to acknowledge where her journey had begun. Marcus joined her, having tracked her out of instinct or connection, the wordless understanding they developed over a decade of partnership. She'd been running from a life that was killing her slowly, and the crash had forced a reckoning, had stripped away everything except her essential self. In that vulnerability, Marcus had seen her, truly seen her, and offered help without agenda or expectation. That moment of grace had made everything else possible. Thank you, she said, not for the first time, but with fresh understanding, for choosing to help, for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for building this life with me. Marcus took her hand. Thank you for letting me, for trusting me enough to stay. They stood together in the desert night, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, who'd built a family and a life from wreckage and hope. The stars overhead bore witness as they had for 10 years, unchanging and infinite. While beneath them, 2 human lives had been transformed by the simple, radical choice to care for one another. Helena thought about the woman she'd been, the frightened heiress running through the desert in the dark. She wanted to tell that woman that everything would be okay, that the fear would pass and something beautiful would emerge. But the fear had been necessary, the breaking down required for the rebuilding. Without the crash, without the desperate need, she might never have accepted help, might never have learned to trust, might never have discovered who she could become when she stopped performing and started living. As they walked back toward the ranch house, warm light glowing in the windows, Helena felt the completeness of her transformation. She was no longer running from or toward anything. She had arrived, not at a destination, but into a life that unfolded daily through choice and effort and love. The desert had witnessed her lowest moment and her greatest transformation. This landscape that had seemed so hostile and unforgiving had become home, its harsh beauty a constant reminder that survival required adaptation, that thriving required connection, that nothing truly valuable came easily or without cost. The ranch house welcomed them back, solid and real, filled with the evidence of their shared life. In the morning there would be work to do, horses to feed, children to wake, the endless responsibilities of the life they'd chosen. But tonight, there was only this moment, this breath, this perfect, imperfect reality they'd built together from broken pieces and impossible hope.